Someday we all remember this. Crawl till dawn on my hands and knees. God damn these vampires for what they've done to me.
Welcome to the 2-month review, the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3%. We're talking about 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. We're into the part about Arcamboldi. We're going up to page 806. I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books, joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox.
Yeah, it's cold here today, so I dressed like a hipster lumberjack. Not feeling good about it, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I'm repping Brazil over here, if you can see, and all snuggled up. It's cold as shit.
Yeah, no, I'm good. How was your week? What's going on?
Not too much. I got attacked by my cat, which if you're watching, you can see a nice scar across my forehead. Yeah, I look like I took a knife to a cat fight, and I lost.
That's kind of perfect when we're going to discuss Germans and Nazis and stuff today, because in cinema they always have to have. There's like that trope of a villain having some scar on his face, which really sucks. If you're just a nice person that happens to be missing an eye and have an eye patch, like, it's not your fault. But Western cinema's made it where if you have any kind of incongruity with your face, you're an evil, awful person. So
there's a bit in Dubravka Greshik's Thank You for Not Reading, which we're reissuing this spring. And one of the essays talks about the proliferation of smoking being bad in cinema.
That too.
That's also a designation of like bad people are smokers.
That's just what somebody who smokes does to justify their terrible habit. we were having a discussion actually, Katie and I, with somebody that smokes, and he knows better. He's a professor in Croatia or something.
I like knows better being like a silent judgment there.
Oh no, like he teaches molecular biology. So he knows like all of the specific ways in which he's going to get cancer. He like knows all the terminology for it. But he's like, but he had the best defense. He's like, Katie, if I stop smoking, I will literally go insane. This is why I keep smoking. And it's like, you know what? That's fine. Like, he realizes this keeps me from being a freaking crazy person. Would you rather me be crazy or I die early? It's my choice. It's like, yeah, that works for me, man.
I remember one of the studies coming out in college, and I was a smoker, about how people who had schizophrenia, one of the best ways, they tended to be smokers, and that tended to help keep it somewhat in control. And I was like, perfect. Nobody wants a truly schizophrenic Chad. And then 15 years later, after not having a cigarette and God knows how long, like now it's full on. Now we're talking about like weird books involving like.
Well, there's this wonderful line in what movie is that? Black Hawk Down. Ridley Scott's Black Hawk Down. It actually does have some lines in it other than just gunfire. But one of the very few lines of dialogue is this Somalian warlord offers a general a cigarette. And the general says, I don't smoke. And he's like, oh, that's right. You Americans live long, uninteresting lives.
That's so perfect.
I always like that one.
How was your week, Ben, man? You ready for...
I have no idea what's going on. So it's fine. It's just pretty much normal. I've had a couple of random hangovers that came out of nowhere, which seems to happen during the holidays. And other than that, great.
I have a hair of the dog ready to go.
Oh, there you go.
I'm finishing my coffee first, but I'm with you on this one today. Today is going to be a long day. Anyway, so we're talking about this section. We don't have Katie Whittemore here because she
has a life.
She what?
She has a life and a family that loves her. So we are here.
So we're here, unloved with no families, or unloved by our families. In fact, that's probably true. Well, fair enough, man. I wouldn't be around me. So, without her, she sent a note, and her note was like this whole long essay about Lacanian psychoanalysis and writing, but it was also in fucking Spanish, and so I don't know what she wanted us to talk about, and I'm at a super loss. This section wrecked me.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here.
There's a lot going on here. They're like we go from masturbation into drinking semen, which is like an interesting parallel from last week to be the most offensive person on this podcast. Last week when I talked about everyone masturbating, this week is a lot of semen, like a lot of semen.
See, I guess it just goes to show you, much like marijuana, masturbation is a gateway drug.
It is a gateway. Embrace the gateway. There's that, but there's also like, and we have like things that we could talk about in terms of like those threads that we talked about, but there are two big sections that stood out to me. One being, I guess three. There's the writer that we talked about last week that we left off with, of Ansky's journal that Archamboldi's reading, and Ivanov, the writer who creates, publishes these 3 science fiction books that Ansky wrote, and gets kicked out of the party, gets arrested, goes to jail, dies.
Yeah.
And Ansky like sort of loses his mind. And then there is the section about when Archamboldi is in a prisoner of war and his neighbor refers to himself as Zeller, is it? I forget. It was something with a Z. And then admits that that's not his name. His name is Somner. And that he was like in charge of getting rid of 500 Jews that came on a train by accident. That's a section. And then there's the section of the speech from the typewriter person when Archamboldi writes his first book and goes to rent a typewriter to type it out. And he talks to this guy who's a former writer who gives a speech that is like straight out of like a Faison book, but also like is very much like here is the state of literature today. Echoed by then the sad part where I read the publisher section, where the publisher's like, yeah, I want to do your book, but nobody cares about books, man. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just trying my best. Like I'm just here publishing books. People don't read. I'm sorry, I can't give you a good advance. And that also hit a little close to home. So those are the notes that I have. Although I wrote 2 notes the other night when I was reading late at night. One says senseless scene after senseless scene, and the other says Dracula is in my blood.
All right.
So we can unpack that as well. There we go. This is today's show. Welcome to the 2-month review.
No, I think what I really kind of hooked in on was the writers and creating art during times of like chaos and destruction. And it's even echoed in the way sexual relationships are as well. If you equate that to the creation of art as well, like something beautiful, right? Even though it's maybe not necessarily beautiful in the way it's depicted here, but expressing yourself, whether it's through art or through an orgasm or whatever, but that juxtaposed with like terror and chaos and destruction, I thought ran through all the parts here.
Yeah, there's if you wanted to, as a thesis, trace like the sexuality of Archamboldi's bit so far, it's pretty wild. Mm-hmm. Like there's a section, even I forget where it is in here, but where he's like, well, nobody after the war, people didn't have sex anymore. They fucked whores, but like there was no sex anymore.
Because there's also that one thing that talks about like purity and that echoes through this as well, because it first starts off with talking about love, and I think it was like not determination, but if I was smart, I would have wrote notes, so I had this all queued up, ready to go. But
here's the one that came up to me. This is from the guy that loans him that rents him the typewriter. This country, he said to writer who that afternoon perhaps became Archamboldi, has tried to topple any number of countries into the abyss in the name of purity and will. As far as I'm concerned, you understand, purity and will are utter tripe. Thanks to purity and will, every one of us, hear me you, become cowards and thugs, which in the end are one and the same. Now we sob and moan and say we didn't know. We had no idea. It was the Nazis. We never would have done such a thing. We don't know how to whimper, or we know how to whimper. We know how to drum up sympathy. We don't care whether we're mocked so long as they pity us and forgive us. There'll be plenty of time for us to embark on a long holiday of forgetting. Do you understand me?
Yeah, and that's like the antithesis to the earlier, which I'll try to find in a moment here. But yeah,
this section
that part as well.
Really fucking dark.
I guess we can just kind of jump to that little climactic scene right there. What do you think it is that makes him make up his pen name right then and there in that shop when he sees that pristine typewriter.
Okay, so I have an interesting thing to say, or maybe it's not an interesting thing to say. What a bullshit statement that I just made. I have a thing to say. I don't think it's interesting, but there was the moment where like he's talking to Ingeborg. So he meets up with her again. She's like, "Don't you remember me? I'm your girlfriend." He had promised last week in our episode last week that he would never forget her name. He promised on the Aztecs, all that stuff, and he figures out who she is. And then she's like, "Have you killed someone?" He's like, "Yeah, actually I have." And at that moment I was like, wait, who the fuck did he kill? And then he says in the next paragraph, he's like, tells the story of how he killed the guy in the prisoner of war camp. And I wasn't sure, I didn't go back and look, but like I read this on like 5 different nights and I was like, shit, did he actually kill him before that? Or is that the first time it came up? Because this is a very Pynchon thing to like have that, the event, you talk about the consequences of the event before the event itself is described. And then he goes to that place and he's like, I can't let anyone know my name because they might be looking for me because I killed this person. And he has this like guilt over that. And the guilt is like related to him killing someone who literally slaughtered 500 Jews, not necessarily, not even by himself, but involved like all the townspeople, 10-year-old kids, 10-year-old drunk, poor kids, Polish kids, to kill and bury in a giant like single gravesite all these Jewish people. And he's like, well, you know, I killed that guy. Like I need to hide myself because they might be after me, which really like they should be after the other guy. You should be a hero for that in some sense. But then he grabs onto that name. The Arcamboldi is funny because it's like it's like slightly off from what the artist was, right?
The artist, yeah.
That Ansky is writing about. The name is slightly different, but like close enough. But yeah, what a weird. And then if you notice, like from that point on, he's not referred to as writer anymore. He's referred to as Arcamboldi by the narrator.
Yeah. That's the change, I guess. Yeah.
Look at the transformation in that scene. That I could conservatively talk about this thing from him about writing and about masterpieces for 3 or 4 hours.
For sake of time, we're not going to do that today, or
no, I'm just going to do it by myself. I'm going to. We were 2 minutes away from me just coming on here live and just reading that and talking about it until everyone left.
It wouldn't take long. It's like there was that one Penn and Teller made a Nintendo, the original NES. They made a NES game, and it was a really terrible video game. And one of the games, I think it was called like Desert Bus Driver. And the way this game worked was you're the driver of a tour bus and it's just a straight road that doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't turn, doesn't do anything. And there's a timer that goes up and it never stops. And you just drive the bus into oblivion forever. And there's no points. There's no skills to achieve, nothing. If you like veer off the road, like you lose, but you can't win. And that was their game. Like that was one of the challenges in the game. It's just this never-ending stupid road that goes to nowhere. That would be that talk.
Yes, that would be exactly.
Penn and Teller Desert Bus Driver game. Oh man,
just stay on the road. No winning here. No, but I thought that this part was fascinating. Like I marked so many parts of it, and it goes on for like 4 pages. So like. I don't know. Let's just start with it because I think it's really interesting. I think it's interesting the way that when you said that the part that hit you is about writers creating things out of this destruction and out of like the chaos. And the thing that when I wrote down my crazy notes the other night, the thing that I just read was the part about the confession of like what happened when the train showed up with the 500 Jews. And he's like, I don't know what to do. They're from Greece. I tried to call this person. They're not my thing. And it's just like this senselessness. And every scene thereafter is like Arcamboldi just witnessed one senseless scene after another. Everything is like, it feels like it just doesn't even make sense. Like, how is this the world? How does this function? I have another point that I can't forget about. But then out of that, he then writes this book, which we know from the beginning is kind of a masterpiece or is like considered as such. Writes it out in his notebook, goes around a typewriter, and the typewriter guy is like, yeah, okay, man, your name is totally not Benno von Arcamboldi, but like,
it's like,
bullshit. Yeah. Like, I'm not sure how good you think you're at lying, but the answer is not. The answer
That's
is
a terrible nom de
terrible
guerre.
But he talks about being a writer and wanting to be a writer and like then giving it up. But he talks about being a writer. He says, but I also understood that I would never manage to create anything like a masterpiece. You may say that literature doesn't consist solely of masterpieces, but rather is populated with so-called minor works. I believe that too. Literature is a vast forest, and the masterpieces are the lakes, the towering trees or strange trees, the lovely, eloquent flowers, the hidden caves. But a forest is also made up of ordinary trees, patches of grass, puddles, clinging vines, mushrooms, and little wildflowers. I was wrong. There's actually no such thing as a minor work. I mean, the author, blah, blah, blah. But those books and articles, if you pay close attention, are not written by them. He goes on to make this case that like every minor work has a secret author, and every secret author is, by definition, a writer of masterpieces. Who writes the minor work? A minor writer, or so it appears. And then he says, the evidence would seem to be incontrovertible, but what she's seen is only on the outside. The shell of literature, a semblance. And a semblance is one of the other things that is throughout this section, where they talk about like everything's a fake, everything's like not the real thing. And we've been talking about that since the beginning. And here it comes up in terms of writing, and that in the sense of writing, like even if you say that there has to be, for masterpieces to exist, there has to be work that's just average. There can't be like philosophically, it seems like that makes sense. You can't have
check out this parallel to what you're saying right now on page 722. This goes back to Ivanov and Ansky, right?
Yeah.
So the start of this section on 722 is, what was Ivanov afraid of? Ansky wondered in his notebooks. And it goes down, above all, fear of being no good, fear that one's efforts and striving will came to nothing, fear of the step that leaves no trace, fear of the forces of chance and nature that wipe away shallow prints, fear of dining alone and unnoticed, fear of going unrecognized, fear of failure and making a spectacle of oneself, but above all, fear of being no good, fear of forever dwelling in the hell of bad writers. And then you have semblances is just underneath that.
Yeah, semblances, it's right there. And then like I think it shows up one more time, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I think that's like an irrational fear that I think, aside from like, maybe Patterson or somebody like people that do kitsch, like that's a fear of most artists, right? That I don't want it to be bad, or worse than that, I don't want it to get published and it not be great.
Yeah,
that's even worse.
To be mediocre is worse than being bad.
Yeah.
At least if you're bad, like Friends, and you can win the bad sex award. If you're mediocre, you don't even get nominated.
Yeah. No one even notices how bad you are. And
nobody cares. The thing that this is going to tie back into Katie's thing from last week. And this is where I was thinking about Dracula being in my blood and Dracula being in Arcamboldi's blood, is that he's talking, the typewriter man is putting this in the perspective of like a writer who's writing and the wife is watching him and is like, oh, you're writing those words. And he's like, but he's not. That's like the shadow of a masterpiece. There's someone, it's coming through him. It's like she's witnessing a session of hypnosis. And going back, I read the article, the blog post that we talked about last week that makes the case or makes an argument for Dracula being a core part of a character in 2666, like the bad guy. And it is very interesting, the sort of textual analysis of it. But the big thing that we talked about last week was the sex scene where the SS officer is writing in his room and the Roman guy who gets crucified in this section, literally, is fucking the Baroness from G.I. Joe and is saying things out loud about Dracula as if he's being controlled. And there's like a hypnosis sense. There's like a hypnotic or like a channeling through. And this guy's echoing that here in a different way, where he's like, it's not just like that if you're writing something that's like of this nature, you're not actually writing it. It's being spoken through you in some sense, which is interesting again. Like, and I had this vibe the other night when I was reading it of how the book is set up so that Arcamboldi is infected. And he's infected with seeing everything that's horrible. Every senseless scene, he's faced a senseless scene after senseless scene, or scene after scene of senselessness. And then has to write them, has to write and tell tell something, create something, explain something, because he's infected in this way. And I think one of the things that struck me last night is that this book is circular. This chapter goes back. This was written first, and this goes back to the critics. The critics makes more sense if you know who Archambaldi is than not knowing who he is and following that path.
Well, they talk about earlier about digging holes, and he's saying to cover them up because the point is not to be discovered.
What's
and
super
and if you take that to Dracula, like the part of being immortal is to be a chameleon, to never be discovered. Because once you're discovered, that's when the pitchforks come out and the torches, right, and the townsfolk gather.
Let's go deep into this vampire thing for 1 second. One of the words that comes up a million times in this section is mirror. There's so much stuff about mirrors. And isn't the vampiric rule that their reflection can't be seen in mirrors? So like if a lot of things, like even if you take writing as mimesis, mimesis is the point of writing. Like it's a reflection of reality, but a vampire doesn't reflect reality because the vampire can't be seen. Also, Emily Hall just pointed out the guy with the typewriter also seems to make the case that the mediocre writing is hiding or protecting something perfect, which is the next part that I was going to go to as well. I had this section, literally, I had almost the entire section underlined, which is insane.
Just real quick before you go to that, though, to play off of what you're saying with your kind of Dracula being in your blood here on 739. Writer acquired the habit of inspecting the dead like someone who inspects a lot for sale or a farm or a country house. So there's that real estate thing that we're talking about, right? The dead and then the real estate. And then going through the dead man's pockets in case there was any food to be found. Wilk did the same, but rather than doing it in silence, he sang to himself, Prussian soldiers may masturbate, but they don't commit suicide. Some of their battalion comrades dubbed them the vampires. Writer didn't care.
Yep. Vampire thing is interesting. Once it's been pointed out, like it is everywhere. And not to bang too hard on this like really bad joke drum, but the fact that Ansky's books are a trilogy and they are like Twilight, Dawn, and Dusk. They're like 100% like a vampire sounding Stephanie Meyer trilogy. Like which is funny because it's like predates that, but
yeah, it's all low light.
Really funny.
Yeah. Thank you. That's enough.
Where is that? 721. What are they called? His 3 books are Midday. Okay, so Twilight, Midday, and Dawn.
Yeah, but then later.
Also, wait a second. With the hypnosis and with the speaking through someone, Ivanov again is not the writer. Ansky's the writer. So Ivanov's name is on top of someone else's words. Like it's being transmitted through him or through his position. And that sort of transmission thing is the thing that keeps coming up in this section. There's a lot of transmitting ideas, but being under like hypnosis or being controlled by something else. You look like you're looking for something, so I'm going to stall for time.
Oh, no, it's fine. I'm just going through the madness of I have no idea what I wrote and why I wrote it. But
oh, man. No, that's like every morning.
And I did like the part, going back to learning about Ansky's. And I kind of got a Vonnegut vibe with the books that they wrote, like the wartime, the spaceship shows up. It has a very kind of nod to Vonnegut. And the idea of I'm not writing fantasy. Like, damn it, this is science fiction. The importance of the genre. But I liked when Writer's over there at his place. It says that day Writer slept at Ansky's farmhouse and he felt more comfortable than he would have felt at home. Oh,
wait, another one of these like that reminds me of the other time that he goes back to the house and there's the mural that's painted. And he's included in it, looking outside at like the elephant and and a duck going by, and he's like, well, clearly this person was insane. Or no, they thought I was insane because I'm looking outside at a fucking duck. And like, it's another instance of like the mimetic and also him being like a sort of message being pushed through him.
Yeah, and it's again, he's not to maybe grasping at straws, but in that sentence there, he's sleeping during the day, and then later when they're talking about him being called the vampire and him not caring, that him and Wilk, Ryder thought Wilk must be talking in his sleep, and like they would their eyes have sunk. It was like it's like they're awake all night.
Yeah,
and then they're sleeping during the day. Like it could be looking more into it than is actually there, but
for sure. But I don't know that
it's a fun zebra to go chase.
It's a fun zebra to go chase, and it also there's so much about. So as Emily mentioned in the comment, that mediocre writing is hiding or protecting something perfect. There's a lot of stuff about obfuscation in this whole book, like from start to finish, of the real can't be seen. Like if we go back to our very first conversations, was about the critics not being able to know the truth because the truth is also horrible. Like things have to be like the shadow in the cave Platonic setup, that you don't see the real, you don't see the thing. It's like it's covered up. The abyss is somehow covered up. And here's I don't know. I think there's something to this book creating a circle of itself of covering and circling around this abyss, or circling around this horror. And the horror that's not being named isn't just you're man does bad things to man, but something larger and more haunting and is inescapable, and it proliferates. So I was thinking about the going back to the section with is it, I forget I don't want to say his name wrong, Samner, whatever. The
after the Z.
It doesn't start with the Z. He was lying. The non-Z man,
okay.
The F man, that his sort of setup is not dissimilar from the Santa Teresa setup, in the way that there are a bunch of people that are moved to an area that are going to be chewed up and destroyed by that system. And he initially starts putting them to work. Like the first thing he does is oh, you can be workers. You can sweep the town. You can clean this thing, which isn't dissimilar from the women that travel to Santa Teresa for jobs and end up being jobs and end up being killed through that system, and being killed by not one person. There's not one person behind it. There's a number of people being tacitly saying it's fine. And that whole section is fucked me up. I mean, I've read things like that similar before. There's a really great book that we published at Dalkey called Joytime Killbox by David Al-Bahari. That's about two people who drive the trucks during World War II with the Jews, prisoners,
gas trucks,
the gas trucks, and it's fucking harrowing and intense and and really incredibly well written. But this section also had that vibe to me of this creeping doom, and the fact that the guy Zeller Samner, or whatever the fuck his name is, he initially is lying and seems incoherent. My son died, my wife has headaches, this died, this blah blah blah, and then all of a sudden he's hey, no, actually, oh, that's a lie. Let me give you 15 pages of what my life was in coherent narrative verse out of nowhere. The telling of it is weird. There's something about that keeps coming up in here for me too, of that telling, and that I don't know what this means. And the way that that is being replicated. I think I
can't believe I'm trying to find that one thing. I'll find it at some point, but I can't believe we didn't talk about the guy wandering the forest looking for his cut off member last week. How did that escape us? It's a very concrete image.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah. What does this say? I don't have any idea. I wrote a lot of random stuff too. There's one part though that I wrote this where it says where Mickey Bittner, this is a whole nother bit. Mickey Bittner, the publisher / import-export person who's really a thief and is talking about being part of the war in which they carpet bombed everyone. And he talks about it being how it worked. And this is also a very Vonnegut thing, and also a Pynchon thing, in the sense of the planes drop their bombs and the bombs fall within specific bounds. After the first wave comes a second wave. The noise grows deafening. The bombs fall and make craters in the earth. The forests are set ablaze. The undergrowth, the main cover in Normandy, begins to disappear. All the hedges are blown to pieces. The terraces collapse. Many soldiers are momentarily deafened. A few can't hear and go running. By now, the third wave of planes is dropping bombs over the chosen swath. Impossible as it seems, the noise grows louder. Call it a noise. Why not? One might call it a din, a roar, a clamoring, a hammering, a great shriek, a bellow of the gods. But noise is a simple word that serves just as well to describe what has no name. Like a screaming comes across the sky. Like the whole sense of the terror in Gravity's Rainbow is that you don't hear what kills you, right? Like if you hear the bomb, you lived because it exceeds the speed of sound. And this idea of like all the sound stuff that's coming up here reminds me both of the bombing of Dresden, but also like that bit of it. I had another point, but I forgot what it was. I lost my train. Doesn't matter. But oh no, I know what it was. Is that it's also the carpet bombing, the Dresden thing, the referring to Slaughterhouse-5 and the Vonnegut thing that you mentioned, are all about lighting things on fire. And so we have another imagery, another sense of that echo of that imagery of like the landscape being on fire, the pits of hell, the burning. Like it is like Santa Teresa is essentially the war, but like in a slightly different, it's a semblance of the war. It's a semblance of this of this sort of killing that was very concrete and very describable.
Yeah, and then but also within that, we get the idea of like the abyss has been through everything, every section, right? And even here, the way it kind of ties it together on 725. It doesn't have the fire and the war, but let's see here. The year of 1936, and Boris Ansky fucked as if when all hope was lost, he had suddenly found his one true love. Neither of the two thought or wanted to think about death, but both moved, twined their limbs, communed as if they were on the edge of the abyss.
Yeah.
All right. So sex and death and abyss. And then we get that with the way Ryder is making love in this section. There's a lot of death imagery with it. The bombed, the hollowed out city of Cologne right outside their window that they can stare at as they're making. So I don't know. I just find it. Go ahead.
Oh, another one that relates to that is that when he goes to Hamburg to meet his publisher, and the publisher's building is the only one that remains. Like everything next to it has been bombed, and even the people at the publishing house joke that like he controlled where the bombs went. So you have that's another reflection of that same.
Yeah.
I found the part about the semblance. It's 741. He began to think about semblance as Ansky had discussed it in his notebook, and he began to think about himself. He felt free as he never had in his life, and although malnourished and weak, he also felt the strength to prolong as far as possible this impulse towards freedom, towards sovereignty. And yet the possibility that it was all nothing but semblance troubled him. Semblance was an occupying force of reality, he said to himself, even the most extreme borderline reality. It lived in people's souls and their actions, in willpower and in pain, in the way memories and priorities were ordered. Semblance proliferated in the salons of the industrialists and in the underworld. It set the rules, it rebelled against its own rules in uprisings that could be bloody, but didn't therefore cease to be semblance. It set new rules. National Socialism was the ultimate realm of semblance.
Oh, and that's the part I've been looking for, just beneath that. Youth is the semblance of strength. Love is the semblance of peace.
Yeah.
And you get the antithesis of that.
Right before that, so this right before that is the one that I underlined. The love, ordinary love, the love of a man and a woman with breakfasts and dinners, with jealousy and money and sadness, is play acting or semblance. I found when I was looking through my notes too yesterday, I don't know why I have like 380 notes on my phone that are just like random jottings from like usually late at night. And the one before we started this says, Bolaño is trying to kill all hope.
Abandon all hope. What's the beginning of American Psycho? It has something like there's like a hole like that says like abandon all hope, ye who enter.
That's the Dante's Inferno.
Same thing here.
Same thing here. I'm gonna kill all hope. There's no way to get to happiness.
But then you have the writer and the artist inserted in all of that, right?
And what is the role of the artist? And so like if and that goes back to like, what is the role of the artist? So what is the role of him telling all these crimes? What is the role of pointing out the horror? Do you point out the horror because you're going to change people? Because then you have the publisher being like, people don't read. But yet, like, I mean, that section is like, I am this guy. Like, I feel like I'm essentially like, he's upset because he goes back to Germany to restart his publishing. He does other things, but he's like, fuck it, no, I just want to be a publisher. But he's like, what I really miss is being a publishing house, having that publisher house headquarters in Hamburg. It's networks in the form of book orders, linking old bookshops all over Germany, some of whose owners he knew personally, and with whom, when he traveled for business, he drank tea or coffee, sitting in a corner of the bookshop, always complaining about hard times, bemoaning the public's indifference, sighing over the middleman, the paper salesman, grieving the future of a country that didn't read, in a word, utterly enjoying himself. Like, yes, I feel seen.
I took one of those papers.
But the role of the artist, of like the writer, to reflect or to represent, if people are indifferent, if it is this sort of malaise, then what impact can one have? And especially if like, and the idea of like, you're not going to write all masterpieces. And in a way, like, that part reflects Bolaño's life. Like, he's written up until this point. Like, let's imagine that he did write this part first. Up until he gets to here, his world is still like pretty mediocre. Like, nobody's paying attention to him. Nobody's really publishing him. Savage Detective, sure, things happened. But like, whenever this was written was towards the beginning of that point. And there does seem to be that reflection of like, what is his role as an artist is being sort of channeled into here through Archamboldi and through these comments on what the role of the artist is and what the artist's life looks like.
Well, it's like, when I was reading this, I was thinking about the interactions I've had with Rodrigo Frazan, for instance. And I know they were friends. I don't know, but I feel like they have a kindred spirit towards reading, about having a lifelong love affair with literature, and an exuberance that's infectious when you hang out with them,
and not being trained through schools.
Yeah, and but I like hanging out and talking books with Frazan made me realize there are no minor works. There's just work, and we should enjoy the work. It's like when he lists like some of his favorite writers, and it's like, yes, that. Oh, well, yeah, that too. Like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that. That seems like a more of a minor, not one of the major writers. It's like, no, they're all major. Like, everything's major, right?
And then you get the fun late night Frazan where you're talking about like Riverdale and like the beauty of Riverdale as a
like. No, but it's like this love of everything, right? It's all part of culture. It's part of who we are. It makes up it. These things talk to each other. It's like right now comic books are kind of cool and important, and you can use them. And what's his face? Junot Diaz can carve out his own little career because comic books are cool, right? Or like where before it'd be like, it's mine. That's not the fillet of the genre, as the. What was that? Kicking and Screaming? I forget which movie that was, but
yeah, I think that is Kicking and Screaming. God, I love that movie. I've watched that movie so many times.
I know that's not Kicking and Screaming, but it's one of those mumblecore movies.
Isn't it though?
Jeff Daniels, his son asks, "What are you reading?" And he says, "Elmore Leonard." It's nothing important.
Oh.
But he's the fillet of the genre.
Squid and the Whale.
Squid and the Whale. Good call. But that part was like really, in this book, that part was really encouraging because, again, like as a creator, you're like, what am I doing? Like, I'm not getting recognition. This isn't that important of a work. Does it really matter? It's just like a little tree in a forest. But if you're somebody that appreciates the landscape, if you're somebody like every blade of grass is beautiful, every tree is beautiful. It doesn't have to be the crystal lake or the magic cave, right? That gets.
Although going back to
Emily's, that's for tourists.
But that also hides something. Like, you can't see the beautiful lake because it's behind all the mediocrity too.
Yeah. But there are some bad ugly trees out there.
There are some bad ugly trees. Also, like, that refers back to, do you remember our Kessler conversation about when he's in the diner and he's like, it can't be written. These things can't be like talked about. Like there is a concealment. Like the mediocre writing conceals the important things to some ways and is also the thing that makes them important. Like that sort of philosophical tie is interesting in here.
But I like how each main character we've had coming through this is touched and inspired by some type of art or writing in a way that launches them where they're going.
Oh shit. You reminded me of the other thing right as you said that, was that in the Bolaño book that Chris Andrews wrote, like the critical book, he talks about the villains. There's 4 types of villains in Bolaño's work, and one is the bureaucrat, and the bureaucrat is part of this section. I meant to like pull that, but I actually don't have the book here anymore. But yeah, that's another, it's a good example of like the bureaucracy is a villain within Bolaño's world.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying that he wrote this part first.
I don't know where I read that, but I assume that it's true.
Okay. I don't know where I read it, but I'll assume it's true.
It's in one of these, like I've read like 4 books about him for this podcast, and somewhere in one of them it references that this part was written first and he wrote the rest to lead up to it.
Well, yeah, this feels more kind of sprawling and less controlled as the other parts to me so far. And it would make sense then that those earlier parts are going to be a little bit more controlled because they're all trying to fit in and braid with this part.
Yeah, Andre mentions that the Grayson Meyer reference that all of David El-Bahari's book ties in with the discussion about the part about the crimes, which is very true. Like the way that it's treated. I haven't read that book since. It's one of those like weird publishing stories, not weird, but like it was published by Harvill Secker, I believe, in hardcover in the UK. I read it, loved it, but we couldn't buy the rights to it, and it came out in hardcover in the US, I think from Random House. And then Delkey was able to get the paperback rights after I left. So it's like a book that like has sort of like now it's talking about transmitting and lineage. Now I have ways to talk about David El-Bahari in ways I never could before because he was not one of my authors, so to speak. I'm going to vampire that list. I've got Dracula in my blood.
I don't know if I know I read Dracula probably 30 years ago, but
oh my God,
I should read it again. Especially because I know we're going to talk about the end of the triptych that you guys are publishing that I guess references Dracula as its literary reference. So I'll definitely want to touch on that before we get to there. But yeah.
Same. I don't know. What other sections of this were? Oh, this is where when I was saying the thing about the bureaucrat being an evil or being villain is 767. I was a fair administrator. I did good things, guided by my instincts, and bad things, driven by the vicissitudes of war. But now the drunken Polish boys will open their mouths and say I ruined their childhoods, said Samner to Ryder. Me? I ruined their childhoods? Liquor ruined their childhoods. Soccer ruined their childhoods. Those lazy, shiftless mothers ruined their childhoods, not me.
I like the part where... Oh, go ahead.
Here it is. So this is where he kills him, but it's not made explicit. When Samner talked to Ryder, the police chief and the fire chief stood to one side, several feet from them, as if they didn't want to meddle in their former boss's affairs. One morning, Samner's body was found halfway between the tent and the latrines. Someone had strangled.
Yeah.
The Americans interrogated perhaps 10 prisoners, among them Ryder, who said he hadn't heard anything unusual that night, and then they took away the body and buried it in the common grave in the Ansbach cemetery. And so that's where, like, I thought that there was like a reference, but then that it's not explicit. And then it's later where he's like, no, I killed him.
I don't think it really matters how he was killed, but it was interesting that in the part about the crimes, there's so much of that crushing and strangulation and the ligature of the necks. But I doubt that's any connection there. But the one part, the section that stood out to me, and I think it raises an interesting philosophical question, was I think it was the Romanian general that's crucified.
Oh yeah.
And what I found interesting about that is the soldiers are talking about they built the crucifix first, and they weren't even drunk. And so I'm wondering, if you build the death mechanism, do you look for a reason to use it?
Right.
Would he have been killed and crucified had they not built that first?
Also, the fact that he is Dracula and gets killed on a wooden cross.
Yeah.
No.
But I thought that was an interesting, it's like, well, if I didn't have this gun, I probably wouldn't have shot and killed somebody, but the gun was there, so I used it, kind of a thing. Right?
I mean, if you put the crucifix in Act 1, Act 3, there has to be.
Yeah, good old Bolaño's crucifix. Yeah.
Oh man, this isn't. I don't want to. I have lots of like, whatever. It's not. This is a dirty section, but the section about Ingborg talking about the people like sucking men off to like
sex,
get sustenance
yeah.
is fucked up too, in a way that like it really makes it seem like the thing I was thinking last night as I was reading that is that when we're talking about masturbation is like fully like you do for yourself, and the ejaculate, the ending point is no longer relevant. It's like the idea of like your seed is spilled, things are wasted, and this idea of like not wasting and having sustenance through it is like creepy to me, because it also implies that vampirism of like the sort of things going from one to another to another to another of being. And she's like, well, if they look like they had cancer or syphilis, like what a weird two things to put together. I don't know what it looks like if you have cancer. But like if you have, but there's something about that passing down again of like this infection of this thing spreading.
Yeah, nobody wants the old spotted banana unless they're making banana bread, right?
Right.
Yeah, I didn't mean that as a euphemism.
That sounds like a euphemism to me.
No, but I think that connects fantastically with the part about the crimes, because again, it's this idea. This is like this brutal wartime where, gosh, it's just impossible to think about someone giving someone a blowjob so they have calories to survive. But what about a sex worker that has sex so that they can put food on the table, or you know what I mean? And that's what was happening in Santa Teresa. So it's a really interesting, like, it's a different way of looking at the exact same thing that we've already encountered.
Although I mean that section ends with like kind of a joke where she's like, well, some poor.
That was a very funny line. Yeah.
Like, yeah, that semen is got good nutrients in it, and he's like, well, maybe it was just some person who didn't want to pay. Some dude is just like, no, really, like, this will make you better.
Did it ever occur to you that maybe
the connection between sex health and this is really weird? Because there is the Ingborg. I mentioned this at the top as a kind of a joke, and it is kind of a joke, but at the same time, like, shows up in here is that Ingborg is like fucked up. Like they're like, you have like 3 months to live. She's burning up. She's dying. And then like they have anal sex, and she's like, I'm better now. Like and it's right there, like one paragraph to the next, almost like it's too close to not connect.
Yeah, no, again, it's that there's that like the sex and death and the detritus of civilization around, like these things keep, if you want to use your circle or whatever, there's this rotation where this keeps, there's this revolution where this keeps happening in different ways, but the same thing.
So what about the idea
that
this keeps happening in different ways, but if you go back to the beginning and read this all again through that lens, it's back to the idea that things are obscured. So like that point that the mediocre writing is hiding or protecting something perfect, it's also that all the words, all the systems, all the ways that we have like the maquilladoras, the deaths, the femicide that's not attributable to one person, the like spread of that, like it's all replicated, but you can't point to it. The same way you can say Nazis were bad. And even then it keeps trying to complicate that and be like, I was just a bureaucrat, man. We all are it's a long season of forgetting that's going to happen now, because like, we're like, oh, I don't know. How did that happen? Like there is something about the layers that this keeps replicating itself, but becomes more complex within our current world, in which it's harder to pin down the specific like faults of it. It's just built in. This book kills all hope.
Yeah. So here's that 773 line. But what makes you think one girl came up with the idea and not a few at once? Writer asked her. What makes you think a girl came up with it at all? And a country girl at that. Could it have been some fast talker wanting to get sucked off for free? End of paragraph, or end of section. One morning, Ryder and Enberg made love. His gallows humor is just, it's just so spot on.
It really is.
It's surprising, continually surprising throughout the work, for sure.
Yeah, there really is. That whole section that where that ends has an earlier part that I underlined that also it was what I was referring to in terms of like the sexuality and like the humanness of sexuality post-war. So in 772, at first the relations excluded sex. Writers sometimes fucked the girls who worked at the bar. These were hardly very passionate encounters. On the contrary, they made love as if they were talking soccer, sometimes even with a cigarette still in their mouths or chewing American gum, which had begun to be fashionable, as it was good for the nerves, chewing gum and fucking this way, impersonally, although the act was far from impersonal, but rather objective, as if once the nakedness of the slaughterhouse had been achieved, everything else was unacceptable theatricality. This section is dark.
Yep. Well,
I guess his first book, the times that it references like him writing and wanting to write. In our early section, you mentioned like the mystery. There's a reference to mystery novels in here too. That's kind of funny. As if they're infected, they infect everything else. Those American mysteries, those English mysteries that like bled over into French and all these other places, that they're infected with that. But the idea of like Archamboldi being the end of our mystery that was set out in book 1. And in this case, like we get so little about his books and about his writing and so much about like the life of the artist, which is the opposite of what we generally want to treat, or what I think of treating art like under the modernist way, or the new criticism way of like divorcing the writer from the work and looking at the work itself. In this case, we get to that person finally. We get the answer to our mystery. Who is Archamboldi? And it's like, oh shit, like someone who lived through like horrible things and is in this group. We get so little about like his writing so far. We're 2/3 through this section, and like his references to his reading and writing are like real weird. It's like as like this Nobel Prize potential winning author.
Yeah. All right, I know there were a bunch. Did you have a favorite line from the?
I'm gonna have to find one.
I'll go. Mine's like I'll just do like a brief paragraph. It's on 764, but I think it ties in so wonderfully after coming off the part about the crimes. Each time someone found something, I repeated the same thing. Leave it alone. Cover it up. Go dig somewhere else. Remember, the idea isn't to find things; it's to not find them. But all my men, one after the other, kept finding something. And in fact, as my secretary had said, it seemed there was no room left at the bottom of the hollow. And yet, in the end, my tenacity won out. We found an empty space, and I put all my men to work there. I told them to dig deep, always down, farther down, as if we were trying to dig all the way to hell. And I also made sure the pit was as wide as a swimming pool.
So what's weird is I'm also putting together one of the Delphi reprints, Languish Go Down, by Aidan Higgins, Irish writer. And the section that I read yesterday includes this character, Otto Beck, who is German, and he's like intellectual, whatever, living in Ireland, and he's talking about like myths of things. And he refers to like one of the myths where like I forget if it was like God or whatever God, that the children were all born underground, and that there are 50 children who like dug their way up, and that became like civilization. And that he's like, well, the proof of this is that we all like digging. All these people like digging holes. It's sort of the same. And reading that or hearing that in reference to that is like keeps tripping me out, because I keep thinking of this other scene, which is not in this book. This book, but like also like sort of connects. I'll go with this one on 787. It's a bit long, but play and delusion are the blindfold and spur of minor writers. Also, the promise of their future happiness. A force that grows at a vertiginous rate, a force that no one can fence in, not even the academies. In fact, the academies make sure it flourishes unhindered. To do boosters and universities, breeding grounds for the shameless, and government institutions and patrons and cultural associations and declaimers of poetry, all aid the forest to grow and hide what must be hidden. All aid the forest to reproduce what must be reproduced, since the process is inevitable, though no one ever sees what exactly is being reproduced, what is being tamely mirrored back. Good enough. So next week, we're going to do our thing early next week because next Thursday is problematic. So if you're a watcher, live watcher, we're going to have to go. You're going to have to pay attention because we're probably going to do it on Tuesday if that works for you, Brian.
Sure.
And if not, you'll just get the podcast. When you get the podcast, it goes up in all the normal places. You can always rate and review us at iTunes. Tell your friends.
What are we reading to?
The end. We're done. Next week is the end.
Got it.
Next week we finish. We get the final Archamboldi experience. We can.
Are we doing one episode after the end, or?
I was going to suggest this is for after the podcast conversation, but we'll include it on the podcast by accident. Having bonus episodes throughout until we get a new season going. Like we can talk to various people. There's the managing editor of the Southwest Review that I want to talk to about who he believes that B. Travern is the basis for Archamboldi, and there's a movie that we can watch that goes along with it. We want to talk to him. We want to try and talk to the person in the play. We could talk about this afterwards, after reflecting as a whole. But I think we could have like short bonus episodes throughout January that are different than our normal weekly episode.
Because I'd also like to include a discussion on Last Words on Earth.
Yeah, Last Words on Earth would be good. Ask Katie to send you her thesis.
No, I don't know.
I think we should all reread Katie's thesis in relation to.
I'm not a masochist.
Oh man, that's dark. It's not very long. I mean,
that's the test of true friendship. Can you drive me to the airport? Can you help me move? Will you read my thesis?
I've read the thesis actually, but I want to go back and reread it because I'm curious now in retrospect how that plays out. But we could have like some bonus. Also, you said Last Words on Earth. Another is Woes of the True Policeman, which is treated as like a precursor to this, as like early ideas for 2666, or the inverse, where it was essentially him writing his Nabokovian, like, here's how to parody Bolaño. Here's Bolaño doing Bolaño. Here's Nabokov doing Nabokov sort of bit. And that's interesting too, because it stars Archamboldi as part of it, but also El Malfitano is the main character. Things are very different, but there is something. I mean, it's in this world in a way, but really a mirror and strange mirrored reflection of it. So I don't know. I've got nothing else. You got anything you want to end on?
Nope, I'm good.
Let's go there. Take care, everyone. Have a good holiday season.
I'm conditioned to say thank you when we're finished playing a song, so thanks. This is a song about there comes a time in a person's life when you need to stab someone in the eye.